It's like massive PP time.
Oh, this is gonna be so big. 36.
Today we have an insane buff to Berserker and some fresh builds to take everyone to the cleaners with. Just like your comments are always the cleanest, I just wanted to thank you again for all the love. And with that, I have a bunch of massive build updates that really take the new Berserkers technique to the maximum level. And towards the end of the video, I have my thoughts on what they need to do to make Mayhem feel more rewarding, which me and the Zerker gang have been talking about in the Discord for weeks. So make sure you join up. All the info is going to be linked in the description. So while you're down there, just remember, my name is Claysthetics, and we're running right into it. And don't forget to like the video. It's the only way YouTube knows I exist. And lighting this off, we have the big new hype buff for Berserker's technique, which is so good, even I re-rolled over to it. I haven't crit a single ult all night, bro. But just in case you don't hit those crits, I've got the 3 strongest builds with the highest DPS rotations that you can get out of Berstech, and the patrons have had these for a couple days now, so thanks again for the extra support, boys. And with the crazy buff that swapped the crit damage over to percent damage, it really ended up making this top tier build even better. And for our maths, when we look at old Berstech at 320% crit damage when we use Keen Blunt Weapon alongside it, it was about 1.13% damage increase. But then when we remove that 70% from Berstech and we go down to 250% for Keen Blunt Weapon, we end up at 1.76, which is an effective 4% increase in our crit damage. But on top of that, when we look at where we used to be, which is that 1.13, we subtract it from the new Berstech, which is a 32% damage increase. So we go 1.32 minus 1.13, and we get 19%. So between that and the crit damage, the return is technically like a 23% buff, but I rounded it to 20, so it would look nicer in the thumbnail. And for all the napkin mathers,
it's time to stop, okay?
So this is my current setup, and I haven't been beaten on damage once in any of the groups I've been in, and it really has the potential to just let you absolutely hard carry anybody you end up with. The only problem I have is my accessories are a little lower quality, so I don't quite have as much spec as I actually need to make it a truly smooth build. And at this stage of the game, it's probably better to go crit spec neck with all spec accessories, but in the future, like I have here, you want to add a ring or an earring with swiftness, because it really helps get you that raid captain maxed out when you have a yearning buff in your party. So the first build I'm going over is Salvation on a 15-second Enrage, and it feels so clean to play. But to make it work, you're going to need 1400 spec with at least level 4 Rage tripods, or 1500 spec in level 4s. And honestly, I would prefer to get the level 5 focus tripods with 1500 spec, just in case you miss one of your skills. But in all the builds, we do want to run CDR on Tempest Slash instead of Fury, just for raw DPS, and we don't actually need that tripod to have a short Enrage anyways, and the other tripods are pretty standard with the focus of our biggest damage being on Finish Strike. And the overall loadout did change quite a bit from the last video, but if you can get your hands on a 40% damage gem for Finish Strike and Bloody Rush, your damage is going to be out of control. But the engravings did get swapped up quite a bit, and now it's mandatory for every build to have Keen Blunt Weapon because it's your only source of crit damage now. So like you can see, what I personally run is Berstech, Grudge, Keen Blunt, Raid Captain, and Cursed, and I personally think these are going to be the absolute best engravings you can run as Berstech after the patch goes live. For now, you just have a ridiculous amount of crit damage. And when you max Salvation stacks out, you're going to get an extra 10% attack speed, so increased mass actually becomes super valuable too. I just personally hated how the attack speed felt outside of the Enrage, so I went the Cursed route. And remember, an attack power engraving on a Berserker is far more valuable than it is on other classes, because Red Dust gives a 25% boost to your attack power when you use it. And when you really start abusing good Red Dust DPS rotations, it lets you dominate the other classes. And I have 2 DPS rotations that you can do, and you've seen one of them before, but some people couldn't get the flow or vibe to it, so we adapted and made a second one. But we always need to start by enraging. And if you're practicing Enrage because you're new to Berstech, what you can do is you can equip Mayhem in your engraving services, just pop over to it and then pop back, and you won't have any kind of cooldown. You can reset your rage, no problem. But I do want to show you how fast you can enrage versus a real target, if you can call Descaluta a real target, but anything is better than a target dummy to show off real potential. So I always start with my bottom rotation of skills, which are all of my generators, and I set it up like that just so it's really easy to watch and it's easy to think about and use. And then I go into my top rotation of skills, which are all my damage skills, and then back into the bottom. And what I like to do is I like to take the Hellblade off of that first Red Dust because it's not going to get the benefit of it anyways, and I cast it with that Maelstrom. So as you can see, I got enraged in like the 20 seconds, and then immediately cast that Red Dust into a Finish Strike and wind that big ultimate up. I really didn't want to miss it, honestly. I was like, oh god, and then that happened, so it is what it is. So When you enrage, I always want to start my rotation with Red Dust, Finish Strike, Strike Wave into Bloody Rush, and the Red Dust window should finish with capped attack speed right before Bloody Rush's last tick of damage for an insane burst. And if you perform this every time it comes up, you're basically just auto-locking MVP because of the raw DPS output. Then, for your off Red Dust, I always like to Finish Strike and then Ultimate or Hellblade and Tempest Slash, depending on what's up. I personally like to put Hellblade on every other Red Dust because I feel like it's a lot more forgiving to do that on higher CC focused bosses that usually won't let you cast a Strike Wave into a Hellblade. Bro, this big man's just cast 3 CCs in a row, and that's a perfect example of why this never works for me. None of this stuff is protected, so it's important that you have more opportunities to do stuff. But the other way to do this is to Red Dust, Finish Strike, Bloody Rush, and Tempest Slash. And then in the second rotation of Red Dust, you would want to Finish Strike, Strike Wave into Hellblade. If you Hellblade into Strike Wave, it doesn't work the best because the Strike Wave keeps ticking while you're Hellblading. The only problem I have with this rotation is sometimes that second tick of Hellblade doesn't fit in the Red Dust window if you don't have that absolute 40% attack speed cap. So if anything goes wrong, usually you can just Maelstrom cast a skill for the crit chance. But the main thing I want you to focus on is Finish Striking after every single Red Dust. It's the most important part of your kit because the skills have the exact same cooldown and need to be used together for the max DPS output. And most importantly for your ultimate, just try to cast it in Red Dust with max stacks of Salvation. And if you cast at an important part of the fight where you need to push DPS, power to you. But most of the time I know you're just trying to slam this thing off for that big juicy damage. But honestly, if you practice this and discipline yourself to play in these windows, it's going to make you an insanely hard carry and a really good player when you master it. If you understand how to reset your rotation when something bad happens, when you get interrupted, which inevitably will happen, you'll actually become a god. And for all the people that just keep telling me to run all my abilities on cooldown, there's a reason you don't think Berserker's that good. And it's because if you do that, you just get knocked out of almost all your skills. We got no protection, and that's why your damage is so low. If you're patient and set up correctly with hard work and dedication and really forcing yourself to make the most out of your Red Dust windows while doing your best to back attack, you're going to be all set. And people really did not like that I called Berserker a back attacker in the last video. Only 2 skills, your ultimate and your Strike Wave, don't have back attack. So choosing not to back attack is actually only hurting you and your potential in the long run. That 5% damage and 10% crit chance really goes a long way and is a good reward for proper commitment to learning the fights and being really knowledgeable and having a real DPS rotation with good gameplay. It's what's going to pull you ahead of all the other classes and help you outperform all those S-tier meta classes. Everybody was so mad at my tier list when I launched it because it was like One Punch Man with Steven Seagal's face on him, and that was Scrapper. And since the beginning, people have been getting led in the wrong direction by lower tier berserkers that told you to randomly cast Finish Strike or to spam their skills and get knocked out of them frequently. So if you're lost or just want that group mentality to succeed and be the best, join the Zerker Gang Discord. It's full of some of the best players and people that I'm proud of and so lucky to have around me. It's time to be better because you deserve to be the best. And the second build is where being the best will really shine. It's the more advanced version of Berstech, and this is what I run usually, but sometimes things do go south. But if played with proper W key energy and not that weak scared energy we just saw, it really pulls ahead, and the Squall Tripod on Windblade generates more rage than Windswift and makes the Enrage the same speed as the other build without needing Maelstrom. And you don't need Maelstrom if you play the Red Dust windows perfectly. You will have the odd Hellblade off of an ultimate rotation that'll be scuffed, but that's nothing new anyways. You'll just have to cast that without crit chance. And again, we're going with the CDR Tripod on Tempest Slash. It really helps you pump out a lot of extra DPS. But if you don't have enough spec for a snappy Enrage when you're using it, just go with Fury. It's really not that big of a deal until you hit that higher spec threshold. But as you're seeing on the target dummy in the background, that second rotation of the bottom skills is still going to Enrage you, basically at the same speed as the other spec. The real problem is that you don't have Maelstrom to compensate for getting knocked out of a Red Dust, and that can actually go a long way to have that extra crit chance. So whatever works for you. I personally prefer this just because I like the dash on shoulder charge. As for our third build, we're locking in Dominion, and a lot of people flamed me in the last video for not repping this one properly, but I didn't do it for a few reasons, and I'll go over them after I talk about all 3 builds. But the main drawback I had was just losing the big ultimate damage. But aside from that, you get a pretty free Enrage, which is why most people like Dominion, and it really is easier to play outside of Enrage, and is much more of a noob-friendly beginner build to get into Berstech with. with the added bonus of being really cheap to run. So stat-wise, we do the same as Salvation. The main changes we're going to be making to our build are pretty straightforward. Skill-wise, your ultimate needs to be Chains of Vengeance because Berserk Fury doesn't actually give Enrage, and we'll need to run Awakening 3 or we just won't be able to make this build work at all. And honestly, you can go Raid Captain or Cursadol. Both of these are fine for a 5x3, and a 4x3x2 is fine on Raid Captain or Cursadol too. On top of that, I would just do the same rotation, but your skills have a much lower cooldown, so you have to be careful you don't go because it does let you spam quite a bit. I did see a lot of people go 4 Dom 2 Nightmare or 4 Dom 2 Entropy. Personally, I was just running 6 Dom to see how it worked, and I literally just couldn't keep my mana, so I had to go 4 Dom 2 Nightmare. But with the lower cooldown, it allows for more mistakes and more opportunities. But the last build only has the opportunity to be either the best or the worst at the same time. And of course, I'm talking about the meme crit damage build Entropy for our average Berstech enjoyers. Me and the boys built this, oh my god, it was so long ago. And honestly, I had a lot of fun playing it, and I had a lot of fun talking memes about it in Discord for such a long time. And making your crit damage go off the chart really made you feel like you were doing something special when it really wasn't that good at all. But it was a true meme god build, and it got a lot better with this patch. And I do have to say, before I talk about Entropy, like, it might have the highest potential for damage, but it also has the highest potential for just extreme failure. But it is just fun to try sometimes. But if you can't back attack, it's literally like you have an Argos set on and you just do no DPS. It's pretty brutal and just forces us into Ambush Master again. And rotational wise, I play the same as before. The main focus is just going to be to back attack all the time and just hope things work out for you. Because when you get those god pulls, you're going to get insane numbers, but when those bad pulls happen, it's really going to hurt. The main thing about Berstech is it's just about big DPS with a bunch of Giga Chad rolled in, and it's almost as alpha as that Bonky Man. So just to rate all 3 builds on like my personal scale, Salvation is my absolute favorite. It gives you everything you need. Insane damage output, free attack speed, and crazy survivability when you get low, which is going to be insanely valuable when you're learning the newer raids. But the most important thing is you get that huge damage ultimate that kind of just lets you solo push bosses out of phases and turns you into a little mini Tyrain, but cooler and redder. So second up, Dominion. I personally think it's great for beginners and farm content, even chaos dungeons. The CDR makes the build genuinely feel really good. But the way I play it, I just run out of mana if the boss isn't doing enough mechanics. And what really sucks is if you have too much spec later on, you end up over-enraging your buff from Dom, so you're kind of capped at 1400 to 1500 spec max. And this build is best played with as much spec as you can get. And when you're already so heavily invested into a stat and you're removing part of its effectiveness by chopping your ultimate damage down, it really doesn't feel good or make a lot of sense to do either of those things. And I know level 3 Dom is only a 10% ultimate damage reduction, but at level 1, it's a massive reduction. And it makes me hate the idea of it, considering that ultimate ends up being one of your top damage skills in the overall breakdown in the other builds. And being forced to run an Awakening as Engraving kind of feels like a waste to me too. The only positive thing is that it's actually really cheap compared to the other builds. So with all those negatives, just for an easy Enrage when Enraging is already so easy with higher spec and decent tripods, I personally don't think it's worth it just for the CDR. Especially considering we're about to enter a massive burst meta, and you can see very easily into the future, so go take advantage of that. But finally, the meme build Entropy, I genuinely think I love it more than I should just because I built it with the community, and I've seen it do some crazy stuff in perfect situations, but I've also done ZDPS with it, so it is situational, but it's fun to mess around on sometimes. But no matter what you decide to go, I think Berstech is a new top tier meta class when played by a truly good Berserker, and you'll be seeing a lot more of it coming up very soon because it really starts to pull ahead with this crazy buff. But I'm not trying to sell Mayhem short because really good Berserkers are still slamming with Mayhem, and while the build hasn't changed much, I do want to talk about running something closer to 1200 crit and 900 swift, which most people are already doing. It's just the CDR that you're after here. You're just always going to be attack speed capped, but it also lets you put bleed on your chain sword instead of having attack speed. I was always running my build like this with Adrenaline because it's just a really solid engraving to replace like Cursed Doll or Mass Increase with. It's just annoying to play around. So if you're going to go the usual 70-30 crit swift build, it's still just fine, but you are going to be better off with like a more even split with about 1200 crit. And in a decent group with crit chance synergy, it's really just going to be fine. But engraving wise, nothing really changed from the meta, and Nightmare is still your go-to for gear. But there is like a 4 Dom 2 Nightmare build that lets you get insanely spammy and actually gives you like a true Mayhem Berserker feeling where you're just like running skills all the time. But then you need to add Awakening to the mix, and when I was testing, I was just getting more out of full Nightmare. But some people might like this style more, so that's why I bring multiple options up, because some people don't have 1,000,000 gold or 1,000 Fions, so they just run whatever they can get, and it is what it is. But a lot of people have been asking my opinion on what kind of buff or change Mayhem needs for it to be better without being broken. And I think the easiest way to start is to revert the damage nerf on Swordstorm and Hellblade. Pulling those 2 tripods back up by 30% would help quite a bit because it was never really overpowered or broken in the first place. The real problem for both specs, in my opinion, is animations and how clunky they can feel. Casting certain skills back to back actually just makes it feel like you're lagging, and they all have insanely long animations that are so easy to get knocked out of. So it doesn't really feel good when you're supposed to be a berserker and you're kind of just like a glorified slow assassin that has no super armors at all. So I think if super armors are out of the question, or a CC immunity for like 1 skill after casting red dust, kind of like the Bard shield, then something that would help a lot that Black Desert did really well was like an animation smoothing and ability combos. And I think improving the ability cast speed isn't actually the right play, because if we get too many moves in the red dust window, it's going to be bad for the game because we'll just be overpowered. But fixing it in a way that they flow together so there's a much crispier combo, and then you can actually feel like a real berserker with those big heavy hits. It's something that they really hit the mark on for Destroyer with Class Fantasy, but has always felt like a little bit of a miss on Berserker, and the gap is just getting bigger as the fights get harder and harder. So I really want to feel strong and powerful when I use my skills, and if all the abilities had that better flow, I think that in itself would be a massive buff and a good enough overhaul that it would just make Berserker better in the long term for like future releases. And if it does fall behind in damage like any other class, you can just buff its level 5 tripods. But I'm not really having damage issues. It's just how unresponsive some of the skills can feel, especially because I used to play on the other servers, and playing on 200 to 300 ping really isn't actually that fun because everything just breaks. So when I get down to 50 on like NA, I actually feel like an insane buff to my character. But a lot of people didn't get to experience that agony, and I hope you never do. And I think limiting the red dust window to like 3 to 4 abilities like it is now is the best way to go, unless they disperse that crit chance and damage to the rest of the kit. But having the red dust window helps you feel unique, and I actually enjoy its gameplay loop, as I know most people actually hate it. But if you actually got like 5 or 6 skills in a red dust window, they would just be actually out of control and get really overpowered. And I don't want to be overpowered. I just want the character to feel better and play better overall. I know that's something almost everyone I've talked to agreed with. Of course, some people just wanted that over 9,000 power buff, which is just ridiculous.
What, 9,000?
Or is it?